guys, today I'm going to be sharing the house buying secrets that you need to know and how to find the right renovation project for you. So this video is going to be perfect for people that are first-time buyers, or perhaps you're now considering buying a renovation project. Now, a renovation in general is such a personal decision in terms of what you might end up with. There's always going to be somebody that's more willing and more able to take on something than someone else. So I'm going to also share some of the properties that we looked at as part of our house buying process and go through the reasons why and how we came to the decision not to go ahead with those properties and how we ended up here at the Bluestone Villa. Now, complete disclaimer, first of all, I'm not an estate agent, I'm not a solicitor, I'm not a financial or mortgage advisor, I'm not an architect, I'm not a builder. I have no professional skills around the house buying process or house renovation process. I'm just a regular 30-something that has been through the journey of buying a house now twice. And the second one, the one we're in right now, is of course a project. It's not a project as much as some people's projects that you might see on Instagram. And again, that was a really key decision that we came to ourselves and something that you will definitely want to consider as part of your own experience. So everything I'm sharing here today are things I've learned along the way. So first of all, it's research, which I realize sounds like such the no-brainer, but honestly, there's such a twofold benefit to you doing as much research on the market in your area that you're looking as possible. When you're first looking, or before you start looking, you'll want to consider what type of property you're looking for, what your expectations are for that property, what location or locations you might be looking for that property in, and also how much can you actually afford. Now, it's really important because that means that when you start the actual search process, you're going to have a much better idea of what you can afford and actually what you might get for that money. And that allows you to A, look more strategically, but B, also allows you to understand when you might be able to get a good price renovation project. That means that actually in the long term, when that house is finished, you're going to be able to ask for X amount or more for that property, when actually you wouldn't have been able to afford that perhaps if it was done and ready when you were looking. Now, on top of that, it's also super important because knowledge is power, guys. And when you are negotiating offers on properties, whether it's an absolutely fine regular property to a disaster zone that you're going to need to do some work with, it's really important that you understand how much things are selling for in that area. Now, that doesn't mean that you look through Rightmove and you look at all of the properties and you say, oh, wow, like all of these are up for this amount of money. It means you then click through to see nearby sold prices, for example. Or you can go on Zoopla and look for certain roads in that area as well, or even just go to Land Registry and look it up. I've done all of those things because a house is only worth what somebody is willing to pay for it. You can have a house up for £1 million. It doesn't mean that necessarily that house is worth £1 million, because actually most people that have sold that exact same house in the last year have sold it for 850,000. And right then and there, you know for a fact that either this is probably a difficult vendor that has high expectations for this property that nobody else is going to meet, or it's an agent trying to kind of get as much out of a buyer as possible. And it also means that you can valuably, when you want to offer on a property, go to that agent and say, I appreciate it's this price. However, we've done our research. These are all the properties that have sold in the last year to 2 years in this area. We believe, therefore, that this price is more around this area over here. So it just gives so much more credibility to your offer. It also means that if it is a fair bit lower than the asking price, whilst it still might be insulting to that vendor to an extent, at least it's realistic. And you also know that if you're going to offer that and you've got all of the research to back it up, and it's still declined and nobody's willing to budge, you know it's just kind of not meant to be. I know sometimes the heart wants what the heart wants, but it really makes sense to have a head on your shoulders in this particular area. And it goes even more so for the fact that you don't want to be overpaying for something. Now, first of all, your lender probably isn't going to let you overpay for something. So if you've got a mortgage, then chances are, even if you offer what somebody is wanting, if it's too much and your lender thinks it's too much, they're only going to lend you X amount of that mortgage. And either you've got to find the cash for the rest of it, or you're going to have to walk away. And so that's, again, super important. You might be willing to overpay or pay a little bit more than you're comfortable with if you can afford that, if you're planning to live in this house for the rest of your life. But if you're planning to sell this house in, say, 5 years' time, it doesn't make any sense to be paying over the odds for it, because you want as much maximum value back to you when you sell on in 5 years' time, so that you can put that chunk of money towards your next place, which will probably be bigger, maybe in a better location. My second piece of advice is choosing the right financial or mortgage advisor. And ideally, in my opinion, not using an internal estate agent's mortgage advisor. A lot of agents now have their own mortgage advisors in-house, and they will do anything to get you sat in front of that mortgage advisor. They have targets around getting people through the door to that mortgage advisor. Mortgage advisors tend to take a kind of finder's fee for your mortgage, so I'm sure there's some kind of financial benefit to the business as well that you use their own financial advisor. But there are some other reasons why they do it as well, beyond kind of targets and financial. If they have you through the door and sit you down with their mortgage advisor, then you are giving over, as part of that mortgage process, even if it's just to kind of get a sense of what you might be able to borrow, you are giving over all of your information, all of your financial background, what you earn, what you have saved in the bank, and they are able to know exactly how far you can go. Now, that's a benefit to them. So it means that they might try and push you into seeing properties that are within your reach, but out of your personal comfort zone. It also means that if you are offering on a property that they have on the market, they know how far they can push you to get the right price for their vendor. What you have to remember is every estate agent, even if they're really, really nice and they're not, as they are sometimes perceived, every estate agent is acting for their client, and the client is the vendor. So they are always trying to get the absolute best price for their vendor. So them being able to kind of know exactly what you earn and how much you can afford means that even if that vendor might have been willing to accept your offer at X price, the agent knows that they might be able to get more out of you, so can work with the vendor to try and make that happen. So it just means that if you go with an independent mortgage advisor rather than the internal one, you're able to share that you can afford the property. But it also means that some of that information, is a little bit sacred to you, and you can therefore afford to be a little bit maybe more sparing with your offers. You are able to kind of be a little bit more mysterious in the respects that that agent won't necessarily know if you can go any higher. And actually, if the vendor is willing to take it, it might make sense to accept the offer. So that's some of the reasons why I wouldn't use an internal person. In terms of using a mortgage advisor, I would use somebody that somebody has used, somebody that comes recommended, somebody that comes trusted. I used a mortgage advisor that my mum recommended to me and my sister when we bought our house back in 2013-14, and I've actually used him ever since. I use him every time that our mortgage is up and we need to change it, because yes, you can look up mortgages online for free yourself and sort it out, but you absolutely don't get the sheer amount of different lenders and rates that you can with an independent mortgage advisor. They'll be able to tap in all of your information into a computer essentially, and it brings up everything. And it just means that you have a lot more flexibility and you have a lot more know-how as well in terms of what you can do. I just think it's a much more flexible and knowledgeable way to do it. Also, that mortgage advisor then helps where needed across the buying process. So to give you a bit of an example, when we were selling James's flat, we accepted an offer from a buyer that actually we were told was using the internal mortgage advisor at this particular agent. They knew that he had everything in order and he was getting his mortgage through them. This was a no chain sale on either end, and it took 6 months. And we were the first people that had ever lived in that flat. It was a new build when James bought it, so it should have been quite an easy sale. Now, it wasn't all the buyer's fault. You know, there's solicitors at play here and they can be super slow as well. But it transpired kind of halfway through the process that this buyer actually hadn't in the end gone with a mortgage through the mortgage advisor. They had independently got a mortgage from Metro Bank, and Metro Bank had lots of issues with lots of different things. And essentially it was the buyer having to explain things to the bank. Whereas we know that if we had been in a similar situation, we could have rung up our mortgage advisor and got them to get on the phone to the bank and work with them to resolve whatever issues there were. My next piece of advice is use your contacts. And this is where, when buying a renovation property in particular, it really is helpful to know people that might be able to advise you in certain areas. So we are very lucky to know a number of people that we could lean on for certain free advice across this period. So firstly, there was my mum, who is an estate agent. James's dad has a construction business. So obviously from a building perspective, he's really knowledgeable. One of James's friends is an architect, and I have 1 or 2 friends and family members that are solicitors. So first of all, from an estate agent perspective, my mum's really helpful with kind of negotiating or speaking to about kind of prices around things, just kind of regular kind of advice around the buying process. We were actually able to take James's dad on one particular viewing of a property that needed so much work, and it was such a huge benefit that we took him, because he was really able to kind of highlight why this might not be the perfect move for us. So we looked at a farm in a surrounding village of where we live now. It was beautiful. It was a really fabulous opportunity. It was a really reasonably priced property. It was a beautiful old grade 2 listed farmhouse with lovely gardens, parking, and a separate building that you could perhaps turn into a garage or use as part of the property as well if you were to kind of renovate outwards. But there was a lot wrong with it. So first of all, in the kitchen, it had an acro basically holding it up the kitchen roof. So I would not have even known what that was or why it was there. There was also a beam in the top floor that somebody probably many, many years ago, not really thinking about the repercussions, had cut out the middle of this beam. So the house was kind of like bowing at the sides. We were told by James's dad it would probably need an entirely new roof. The list goes on. It wasn't fit for purpose at all. It was kind of a property that had been in a family for literally almost like probably like the entire time it'd been built. And it was like a 16th or 17th century property, I think. So we were able to kind of get a bit of a ballpark of the type of work that would be required and also the amount of money that was required around it. So James's dad kind of signaled that it could be like 150 to 200,000 pounds worth of work. And another friend that is an architect told us that actually you should probably put like another 100 grand on top of that for things that you're not really accounting for or can't see right now. And James and I just aren't skilled in that manner. While James is really practical and taking on tons here, it is, relatively cosmetic. And this was not something that we were just going to be able to do by ourselves and try and cut down on costs there. Also, wouldn't have been livable whilst we were doing that type of work to it. So we had visions of living in a caravan in the garden, which tons of people do, and they don't mind doing it. And, you know, the value at the end makes that totally worthwhile. But for James and I, it just really wasn't what we wanted out of something. So not only did we not have enough money, even though the property was really well priced, we also just didn't want that life for a year or two. And we actually decided that we would probably end up just hating each other by the end of the experience. So that was how we knew not to go ahead with that. Another property we looked at, which was one of the last properties we actually looked at before we ended up buying our house, was a very similar style house to what we're living in now, but it was separated into 2 flats. And again, it was really reasonably priced, with the view that whoever would buy it would probably more than likely turn it back into a family home. And we were so excited about the prospect of this, and we were genuinely going to offer. And it wasn't until we spoke to a mortgage advisor that they were like, yeah, you're not going to get a mortgage on that because it's split into 2 flats. And yeah, essentially, when something is split into 2 flats like that, lenders are really cautious of lending you the money, because you could say that you're planning to turn that back into one family home, but they have absolutely no guarantee that you're going to do that. And if you decide to maybe change your mind on that and rent them out as flats, or if you decide to rent one of them out as a flat for a little while to help you with the financial costs for a renovation, then if for some reason you default on your mortgage, they can kick you out, but they cannot kick your tenant out. So it's just a huge concern for them. So we looked into so many different ways of how we might be able to do this, you know, being able to maybe get in between exchange and completion to knock the staircase through, or, you know, take out one of the kitchens. Fortunately, somebody who could go ahead bought it and is going to be doing a far better job with that property than we will have been able to do. And in hindsight, we are so glad that that didn't happen. And I'm sure those buyers are so glad that we never figured out how to do it as well, because I know that they will be loving that home. In fact, they're working on it right now, and I'm sure it's going to be incredible. But yeah, without kind of advice from my mum being like, yeah, you're not going to get a mortgage on that. Advice from other friends that were able to put us in contact with people that might have been able to help us on the lending side. We would not have been able to kind of explore that option at least, but we also wouldn't have been able to put that aside as a this is not for us situation. And knowing an architect is also super helpful. Now, I realize not everybody is going to know an architect, but perhaps if you ask around, one of your friends or family may know somebody that's an architect that might be willing to at least give you a little bit of free advice before proceeding with something. Obviously with the view that they might get the opportunity to work on it if you do go ahead. So we have a friend that's an architect that we lent on for advice from in regards to things like we shared our survey with them. We knew the survey was pretty much fine, but we just wanted to kind of get a bit of a second opinion. They're great for helping you kind of see the bigger picture. What can you do to that property? And also, what is that going to cost? Because really important, again, to be realistic with your financials. We have bought this property knowing that most of the work that we are doing right now is cosmetic. We can live here whilst we do it. And so actually the financial outlay initially isn't as big as if we had to kind of tear everything apart and really do major works from the get-go. So we knew that we could put our money towards buying the house and buying the best house that we could, with the view that the bigger work that we might want to do, we can do further down the line, and we can wait for that, and there's no problem with that. But if you're buying something and you're buying it at the top end of your budget, and actually you don't really know how much that work is going to cost, and you need to do that work right now, then really sensible to speak to somebody like an architect who works on projects like this all the time and will be able to advise you on how much you might spend on that property, so that you can be like, okay, yeah, we can't afford this, or at least understand and be prepared for the costs that you might be looking to incur. Another person that's quite handy to know is a solicitor. Now, we've always paid for external solicitors that we don't know for house purchases, but it's still helpful sometimes to know somebody that is their profession, even if maybe that area isn't their specialty, because sometimes you might come up against things that you might want an additional piece of advice from. So one of the issues we had was around registering the property with land registry. So we had an issue with that before completing, but we had an issue that our vendor solicitor said one thing and our solicitor said another thing, and neither of them were budging, and it carried on for 6 weeks. And the crux of it was neither of them were completely wrong. So our solicitor was being really cautious because obviously he was acting on behalf of us and our mortgage lender. So he has to be doing the best for both of those parties. And it wasn't in our best interest to proceed without resolving this particular issue, because essentially what that particular issue could mean is that money could transfer hands from us and the mortgage lender to the buyer, but that land registry would perhaps not accept that we were now the new owners of the property. And so that vendor would own the property and also have the money from us and the lender. Then you're going to have to rely on the fact that your vendor is going to help you resolve the issue, which you would like to think most people would. But fact of the matter is, you don't know this person. So this went on for us for quite some time, which was an absolute pain. Essentially, the view was you could submit everything as it is to land registry, and that person on the day that's dealing with your case at land registry may say, yeah, that's fine. But another person may say, no, that's not fine. And this was kind of the debate for ages. The vendor solicitor thought it would be fine. Our solicitor was like, it may be fine, but it also may not be fine. So we need to resolve this before we do this. And it was relatively simple what we were asking for, but for some reason we got loads of pushback for such a long time. So I actually referred to a couple of different independent sources that were friends of mine that were solicitors, and they all agreed that our solicitor was doing the right thing, and that absolutely on the day, you could very well give all your money to the vendor and not own the property at the end of it, which, guess what, guys, is not an ideal scenario on any level. And finally, my last piece of advice is obviously choosing the right survey. You should always get your property surveyed, and it's important that you choose the right one for you and the type of property you're buying. So there are 3 types of surveys, essentially. There's valuation, which actually isn't really a survey at all, and you can sometimes hear that people just drive by, look at the property and think, yeah, it's probably worth about that much. That's what I've heard anyway. Not always the case, by the way. Sometimes they do actually go in, but just to be mindful. The second is a home buyer's survey. So more expensive, more detailed, you get a full report, and it should hopefully pick up a lot of stuff within the property. So actually, you should be able to determine kind of any major faux pas. And then a full survey, which is so detailed and really actually you would be hard pushed, I think, to miss, a crucial piece of information if you were to go with a full survey. So my recommendation would be that you would move towards a home buyer survey or a full survey when buying a property, particularly an older property, because you want to know of all the kind of things that you might need to know about that might cost you a lot of money, because it means uncomfortably, it might be that you need to kind of negotiate the price again after you've got that. But B, it also lets you know if there's anything major that you're actually really uncomfortable with moving forwards with, or if there's things that you want the vendor to try and resolve before you complete, or for you to know that you're going to need actually that 10K you thought you were going to spend on your kitchen, you're now going to have to use on this. I would never, ever, ever advocate getting no survey or just a valuation. So thanks for joining me, guys. I hope you found some of these tips useful. If you do have any questions about our buying process or finding our renovation project, then please do drop a comment below. Happy to answer anything I can. As I said, I'm not a professional expert in this area. I'm just sharing my experiences over the last few years, and I look forward to seeing you next time.